Welcome. It has just gone 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Wednesday the 31st of May, and you are watching episode 86 of Regional Rap. Sorry, that's 87. We're getting up there. Regional Rap, providing insight on the issues affecting regional Australia and giving the voice to regional residents. My name is Bill Bates, and joining me on this episode, Juvenile Crime, Public Conditioning, is Torin O'Brien. Torin is a Rockhampton business owner, gymnasium operator, and professional Muay Thai fighter. He has personally been affected by a crime wave sweeping regional Queensland and is intent on taking action to arrest the situation and in making a difference to the local community and offer us a statewide solution. Born in Rockhampton, he grew up in New Zealand and later in Melbourne and moved back to Rockhampton in 2008. Like most Queenslanders, Torin is appalled and angered by the events of April 30th, when a 13-year-old allegedly driving a stolen car crashed, resulting in the deaths of 3 innocent people and another left seriously injured. Along with Senator Malcolm Roberts, Torin has headed a meeting at Rockhampton. Let's tackle the crime wave together on Saturday, 27th of May. Welcome, Torin.
G'day, Bill.
Thanks very much for joining us. I think we can start off with just discussing the background of the recent situation in your area, Central Queensland, what happened there, and the events leading up to Saturday's meeting. And also, the fact is, this is not just an isolated area of crime and that. It's right throughout regional Australia, actually. If you look at New South Wales and Dubbo and Burke and all those sort of places, it's just been on the rise in general and has been. But it's quite surprising, actually. I went and looked at Singapore's juvenile crime rate, and it used to be a sort of model years ago with old Lee Kuan Yew, I think his name was the president, and everything was sort of really under control. But I've noticed that over the years, looking at some of the graphs, their juvenile rate, crime rate has picked up as well. So it's an international issue altogether in regards to how we parent these days.
Not just parent, but also punish. I mean, it's pretty across the board now. It's fairly universal that a lot of countries are, essentially getting softer in most areas of society. The law is definitely softer. The court systems are softer. Parenting styles are softer. So across the board, we're seeing this, these serious crimes anyway, skyrocket.
So before this incident, were you, you would have been obviously aware of the crime rate, but were you involved in the community action or that on prior to the instance of April 30th?
Yeah, I definitely was. For a number of years, I took part in a few different government programs through my gym. There's a couple of good programs that just had a few issues. Good programs, good youth workers, but there was a little bit too much red tape, and there was definitely some government control issues there that made things worse, to the point where a lot of youth workers now are going out on their own just to avoid the red tape because they get better results. So one of the programs I was involved in was called T2S here in Rockhampton. It's a government-funded program which stands for Transition to Success. And essentially what they did is they took at-risk youths. They might have already been in trouble, maybe not lots and lots of serious trouble, but they were certainly heading that way. And they collected them, all these youth workers would go around and collect all these at-risk youths and take them to different programs throughout the day. Some of them might have been meetings with, coal mining organisations that are looking to set up careers. Some of them were a little bit more hands-on. And then there was programs like mine where they come into the gym and it was about that physical exercise. And with me being martial arts, there was a bit more sort of the respect to that discipline and aspect involved. And the programs run really well. Through organisation's own admission, my attendance was higher than any other program, simply because it's exciting, it's fun, but I typically connect with a lot of these kids really well. and it went really well for a number of terms. The funding did dry up, unfortunately, but I decided to do it for free anyway. I made that as part of my speech on Saturday, that the poor little regional Muay Thai gym picked up the bill because the government couldn't afford it anymore. Unfortunately, in 2020, throughout my state campaign for Parliament with One Nation, they actually removed me from the program, and specifically said it was essentially Labor is in the government, I'm on the wrong team, and therefore I was removed from the program. So a successful program that cost no money was removed because of political ugliness, basically. And unfortunately, and almost immediately, a couple of those youths that I worked with went straight to jail.
That's unfortunate, but the other thing is too, you've got to be a bit concerned, or the general public has to be a bit concerned that there's, you've got to go around the streets and get these juveniles off the street when actually they should just be in school, like most of the kids are. So obviously, one of the biggest factors leading into this problem is parenting, the home life, and the lack of sort of general structure where people just expect, well, we always, as kids, we did as we're told, we went to school, we did our homework, we did our chores, and there wasn't any lip or anything like that. But now, if kids can sort of just think, well, I don't have to go to school, I don't want to go, or I don't want to do this, well, then I don't have to. So it really stems really from that basis, that because there's no discipline, there's never any chance of establishing self-discipline in the individual. So I think that's probably one of the biggest factors. No discipline in their life, no self-discipline for the rest of their life.
You're right, but it's a little bit more complicated than that. There's a lot of people screaming that parents should be held accountable, and I don't disagree with that. But it's not the solution, because a lot of cases, a lot of these youths, they don't have the parenting home life, and some of the times where it was hard to get attendance in some programs is because it's not that simple for the youth workers. Their job is to go and collect all these kids in time for the program, but they might get to one address to pick up one youth, and they're either not there because they're off caring for a bad situation, or they are there but they have to stay there because dad's got drunk and bashed mum again, or something like that. There's a lot more involved, and sometimes a lot of the time, a lot of the parents that are attached to the really worst youths, they wouldn't care if the punishment was taken out on them anyway. So while in theory it sounds good, parents need to step up and be held accountable. In a lot of the cases, it'll make no difference because the parents don't care anyway. So we need to think a little bit more outside of the square there. And while parents need to take a bit more responsibility, we need to treat this as a situation where they don't have parents taking responsibility, and we might actually get somewhere. Part of the speech I made on Saturday was about my own background, which was probably a lot worse than some of these kids. I didn't have parents pull me out of that hole. I didn't have government support. I really had to do it completely on my own, move out to a regional area, got a job in the meatworks, rented a little bungalow, and this is all by the age 15. So I got myself out of it, and the whole angle I'm taking now is we need to treat a lot of these kids with that same situation. We cannot depend or rely on parents stepping up because some of them don't have them, and so we need to give these kids like the want to fix themselves and the tools to be able to do so.
Looking at kids that are sort of you're talking about, it's probably over the age of 10, but we also know there's ages below that where they're still sort of wandering the street. So if the parents are not going to accept the responsibility of looking after them, there's a reluctance of the state to address that situation. They just keep applying welfare to those sort of situations. There's no attempt to sort of really remove the children to a safer place, or it's the last resort. Those sort of things are not within your bounds, but there are obviously a lot of things in regards to how the state approaches the situation of these households that needs to be actioned separately from the sort of things that the average person in the community can do to help the wayward children.
Yeah, it's definitely hard, and a lot of houses that are housing groups of kids that might have been taken off parents. What we're seeing, and throughout, I had a 2-hour meeting with some really experienced youth workers in the community on Monday, and what they're seeing is that you have a house where they, a government-funded house where they're putting kids up, taken out of these environments. But what it really does is it just lands a few of those same type of kids already in trouble, all in the same spot. Now we've accidentally created a little gang under the same roof. A lot of these houses have codes around them. I was warned a couple of weeks ago, just after one of our road patrols, where there was a house there housing youths, and it was officially classed as code black, which means weapons and bombs threat. So these are government-funded houses with labels because of the fact that they know there's weapons in there, and some of these kids are really young. These can get them 12, 13 years old, and they've already pinched a dozen cars and been held up a couple of shops for cigarettes and all these types of things. So that the problem is so deep and complicated that we really need to start acting now. And what we've seen from the government so far, it doesn't matter which government you vote for, because they've all done a rubbish job across the country. We've just not done enough. We've been too soft, but we've also been too stupid, to be honest.
I think the other thing is too, because the government's sort of, well, we don't want to really be overly involved with these kids' life and being seen to going back to the stolen generation and other things, like bad things that happen in orphanages. We'll let the private sector or NGOs do it. So they fund them, but those NGOs and those households have got zero control over those kids. There's no way they can regulate when they go to bed or if they're in the house or out the house. So that money is spent on NGOs, and it's in the order of billions. It's getting to that. So it's basically wasted, and we're getting no benefit. I mean, really, if the NGOs are not doing the job, and they're not empowered to do the job. I mean, they get money to house these children overnight and things, but that's about all they do. There's no ongoing benefit to the child within those situations. So it seems to me the NGO sort of system of these residential care homes is a complete failure, and the state has to step up and say, well, this is a failure. We've got to take control and responsibility. And whether that goes back to the situation where you build the old institutions like equivalent to orphanages or whatever, where they haven't got the freedom to come and go as they like, and there is some control and discipline within the system. Maybe that's what the governments have to actually step up to and negotiate that with the different communities.
Well, we've already got those facilities. They're sitting there empty. Cost millions and millions to build. They cost millions to upkeep, and there's nothing in there. We've got this huge facility that's built for a COVID quarantine, just sitting there costing millions doing nothing. That's out in the middle of nowhere. There's no reason why that couldn't house at-risk youths, and it doesn't need to be treated like a jail. Like you said, that they can't just take off. They're in the middle of nowhere, and they could start teaching these kids some skills to go back to society normally. It's the same thing down south, where they've got an enormous complex down there. They wanted to turn into a homeless shelter, but a lot of people said it doesn't work because there's no public transport access. Well, that would be perfect for another youth crisis centre, because they can't simply just leave. They're already there. They're already empty. They've already been built, and the money's been spent on them. Let's use them.
Yeah, and the other thing is too, I think there's been a lot of suggestions in regards to boot camps and work situations out in the more remote areas. I mean, the state closed down the agricultural schools. One was at Longreach, and I'm not sure where the other one. Pardon? Yeah. So they would be ideal locations with the structure where you'd have a classroom environment and you'd have an open area or environment where you could teach farming skills and that, and having control. So there's opportunities out there, but no one's sort of game to take up the cudgel, because they'd be probably looked at as, or the media probably get on and saying, oh, you're too draconian or something like that. But it does get to the stage Well, if you don't apply a bit of authority, well, then you're completely lost.
So we're at the point now, I believe, where we have to stop tippy-toeing around upsetting and offending people. So one of the big takeaways I had from a 2-hour meeting with a couple of youth workers the other day in that community, in the Indigenous community, was that we just need to start speaking to each other normally and not getting offended by all these words. People are scared to take real action in case they get labelled a racist just because a couple of these kids happen to be Indigenous. Now, what I said on Saturday was very, very simple. I told a part of my story when I was young. I was just like them. I'd been charged with car theft at 14 years old in Melbourne. I was on the street. I did all those bad things. Now, I'm obviously not Indigenous. So what does that mean? If we're going to tippy-toe around Indigenous groups that are involved in crime, does that mean we tippy-toe around everyone involved in crime, or are we just charging and locking down white people? Because that's sort of the feeling people have now. It's not really accurate, but it's stopping people from speaking the truth. It's stopping people from taking direct action, because in case they get lobbed into this category of being racist or chasing down the wrong people. It's just ridiculous. And then the angle I took the other day really worked. Straight away, some of the community that were there from the Indigenous community spoke to me afterwards, and they loved what I said. They completely agreed with everything I said. We need to stop babying them. Some of these groups in the community, there's Indigenous groups that have come out in defence of these kids, these criminals, and they're trying to make this a game of privileged white people versus unprivileged Indigenous people, and that's just not the case. As I said, I was one of them. Do I look Indigenous to you? No. I was a car thief. I was caught. I was charged, and I carried on with my life. So until we stop tippy-toeing around, the delicate sort of political environment right now and just get to work and treat everyone equally, the problem is just going to get worse and worse and worse.
I think this brushing of people as privileged white life. I mean, do they really? Very few people are born into money. Most people come from an average family. They go out, get a job, raise a family, try to buy a house. They work. It's just part of the norm, and there's no privilege in it. That's just, we have a society, and this is the expectation that you work, contribute, and you raise a family, sort of thing. But the very few have got the silver spoon in their mouth, and I think the way the media allows some people to push this privileged white situation is sort of a bit innocuous. The other thing is when people like yourself stand up to crime or want to do something about it, unless you fall into the category of being one of those people who wants to do everything for the offender, you suddenly got a lot of labels on you. I mean, you're a ringleader, you're a vigilante, you're whatever. And there's a lot of groups around that are trying to look at the crime, and the reason that they started was because of the victims. They're sick, the victims of crime. They don't want to see more victims of crime. But then as time moves on a bit and they start getting involved, they hesitate to talk about the realities, and then so they shift from the victims of crime and the trauma to sort of the poor offenders, the hard life. We've got to do this. We've got to spend more taxpayers' money, and it's part of. To me, some of it is like they're doing this groundwork to lay that they're going to be in this victims industry, and they're going to be, by supplying some goods or service or whatever, they're going to put their snout in it to a degree. And I find that offensive. But it is a common characteristic where people get out there and get up to set crime, and we've got to do this and that. And then about a month, 2 months later, when they've had a bit of, it starts to be orientated towards the offender.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And this is another issue, and this is just drip fed down from society in general today. And I also made a point of saying this at our forum, that victimhood has become fashionable. See, when I was when I was a lot younger, you know, and my criminal charge for car theft when I was a little street kid in Melbourne was in 2002. So it's a long time ago. Back then, victimhood was not something you would attach yourself to. It was embarrassing. You would never blame your situation or your circumstances on your behavior because it's embarrassing. You don't want people to think that you've done this because you've had such a hard life or because your mum or dad does this or whatever other excuse they come up with. It's on you. Today, it's very different. Today, people are honestly embracing the victimhood. They want to be a victim. They want to have something to cry about. And a lot of the groups that are defending these kids are just reaffirming that. They're just accommodating their ridiculous behavior. They're helping them. They're saying all the right words to lock them into this victimhood, you know, mentality. The stupid thing is they're not the victims. They're the ones creating victims, and they're blaming it on their situation in the background. And I don't accept it. And there was a good reason why I went through my own background at our crime forum on Saturday. And that's because I wanted to clear out all this nonsense about it. The things I'd been through by the time I was 15, I very much doubt any of the kids wrapped up in this today have been through that much. I very much doubt that they've faced the things I've had to face, and they definitely got a whole lot more support. I never had support groups, community groups blaming my behaviour on my circumstances. I definitely didn't have anyone let me off the hook because of the colour of my skin.
Andrew? You there, Andrew? Can you put the share on, please? Just
technical difficulty.
Yeah, not a problem, Bill.
Thank you. Yeah, it is.
So as I was saying, there's no, you know, our society is helping these kids think it's okay to cry victimhood and to get away with it. And until we stop making the excuses, and the big one today is age and race. One of the biggest complaints we had, and for the most part, like 99% of our feedback was very positive from the community, from the public. But one of the biggest complaints I saw from that far left was picking on kids. Because there's a lot of, especially that 13 to 15 range where, you know, they're considered very young, but they've still stolen 20 cars and broken into 20 houses. And until we, you know, stop letting them think that they're going to keep getting away with it because they're young, they're going to keep doing it. And until we stop rushing them off to police protection because their victims are now upset, they're going to keep doing it. And we really need to stop babying everyone in every aspect of society, or it's just going to continue to get worse and worse and worse. I never had any of that support when I was a little feral 20 years ago, and I got myself out of it because, well, no one else is going to.
Yeah, other thing is too, I mean, it's not just common within the Indigenous, it's getting more common within our own society in regards to certain socio-economic circumstances. And
it's across the board.
One of the biggest problems would have been the rise of single parents and the difficulty. And this is something that goes, if you look at America, one of the big breakdowns in the United States with the African American population was the lack of a father at home. And that's sort of becoming too common in our society in regards to these economic situations. It's also a situation where households have got children from different fathers, but don't have a dad at home ever, you know, like the dad's not there. So some of these family things, the governments need to certainly address through either education in high school or something, just get it into people's skulls that going out, getting into welfare is not a good life choice. Going into a situation where you're always struggling for a dollar is not a good situation. I don't know, most people, when I was a kid, you had certain goals. Most people, kids around, they wanted to become nurse, doctors, policemen, or even if they didn't eventually come there, they had a fairly good idea that they wanted to have some sort of employment or some sort of profession in that. The biggest thing I find now is young kids don't know where they're at or where they're going. Maybe except I just want to go to university, but got no idea what I'm going to do there.
Yeah, well, there's no generational jobs anymore. You know, I'm probably the last generation. You know, my grandfather was a meat worker, a slaughter and a boner. So was my dad. So was I. and a lot of people used to have those. If you're a train driver or a stonemason or something, things got passed down the line. But those jobs almost don't really exist in that fashion, and the family unit definitely doesn't exist in those fashion. What does exist again is that victimhood, and I think we need to stop pussyfooting around it and call those backgrounds and those generational dog bludgers what they are, a bloody embarrassment.
The other thing is too, that the government doesn't really make it easy for the traditional family unit in regards to, all right, they apply a little few bits like family allowances and that, but that doesn't get into the situation to you have a child or whatever. And to me, I think the breakdown of marriage is probably an issue right through the society. Mm-hmm. And mm-hmm. I think that could be part alleviated when people get married, they become a partnership. And from day one of that partnership, they have split income. So it gives them a better, you've got now two people dividing whatever income is and having two tax thresholds. And that's the start, the foundation stone of starting a family, and then all the rest of it keeps piling up. But there is no benefit in regards to being married and having that traditional value, because they apply the same situation to de facto relationships that come and go, sort of thing. So if we don't improve that, we probably haven't got much chance of improving the outcomes of a lot of kids in those situations.
And as I said, this is such a deep, complicated problem. There isn't just, you need to do this with the troubled kids. You need to do things with the adults, and you need to do different things with different adults in different areas of the country. Everywhere's so different. One of the worst hit crime areas around here is actually out west near Dingo, where, there's not a lot in Dingo. You wouldn't think there'd be a lot of action out there, but I can tell you now, there's a roadhouse that's had $30,000 in fuel drive-offs from stolen cars alone in the last 12 months. Now, can you imagine being a business owner losing 30 grand in fuel? And because it's happened so much, you can't even get insurance anymore. It's like living in a flood zone and getting insurance for your house for floods. You can't get it. Well, there's areas now in Queensland and regional Queensland where if you're in the wrong postcode, and if you've been targeted too many times, you won't get insurance for your business. Now, what does that mean? It means you can't expand, you can't get finance, you can't do a range of things about insurance, and the government's done nothing to safeguard that. Fortunately, Stephen Andrews, who's our Morani MP, he's a neighbouring electorate, he has put something to Parliament asking the government what they plan to do for these things, because, this is a whole other area that a lot of people haven't talked about, is the destruction of businesses around this crime wave. It just goes on and on and on. Every angle you look at to do with why this is happening, what we need to do, there's just so many areas we need to focus on. But to be honest, I think it starts with the courts. We've got to stop. Malcolm Roberts phrased it perfectly. He calls it catch and release, and that's what it is, catch and release. We had about a month ago a person who's just underage, I think 16 or 17, put her bail release form on Instagram because she thought it was quite funny. Now, within the space of 2 weeks, I think there was 4 or 5 car theft charges, multiple break and entering into homes, a theft, assault, and she was in the watch house for one night and let out. They weren't crimes spread out over a few years. They were just the last couple of weeks of her being bored. And she walked out of that watch house scot-free laughing. Now, if we're going to start anywhere, I'd like it to be there, because I'd at least like to know that people like my sister and my nana who were robbed that night aren't going to have those people just wandering around freely. It's quite ridiculous.
I think the other thing is considering the ramp up in the crime rate over the last couple of years, I believe it is, people have, more and more people have been affected by it. More and more people have got angry about it. And more, but overall, people aren't really doing anything positive in the general public. I mean, we've got a couple of groups up here, they organise a meeting or something like that, or a bit of a rally, and 50, 60 people might turn up. Yet, in the year, 1,200 cars were stolen. Obviously, that must affect thousands of people, and also people who know them. Yet people are so apathetic that come supporting some group that's trying to get a bit of attention to it, it's almost a nothing. And I think the problem is that politicians realise this, and they think, well, it's not going to do us any harm at the ballot box. And the other thing that happens is a lot of these groups where they come up and they form a group or an association to sort of address crime and victims of crime and that. Now, one of the first things they seem to want to say is, oh, we're apolitical, so we can talk to anyone. But that's what politicians love. When you're apolitical, you're no threat to anyone at the ballot boxes.
Yeah, that's right.
You say, well, what we're going to do, we are going to be a political group. We're going to try to get political action. And our target is sitting members of the government that are not doing anything. And it's not that they're Labor or Liberal or whatever. It's the fact that they're just targeting those people who are not seen as doing anything effective about the situation. And like I say, I think this is one of the shortcomings in regards to a lot of these groups is that they play the apolitical card. And the other thing is within a short time, they're talking about the offenders and the poor offenders and the poor life, rather than what they originally were there for, is to look after or fight for the victims.
And here's the cruel truth of it all. If the right and the left got together, they've actually got it right. Because if you go too far to the right, your only focus really is punishment and detention, which we need punishment and detention, but we also need prevention, because you can punish and detain, lock away as many people as you like, but if you're not preventing it, you're going to have very full jails everywhere very quickly. Now, on the left-hand side, all they care about is prevention, and they don't care about punishment and detention at all. So between the two, if they just grew up and worked together and put their toxic nonsense aside, they've actually both got the quality that we need to beat this. We need detention and punishment as well as prevention. Problem is, Labor and LNP just cannot get their acts together and speak together like grown-ups and work together and fix this thing.
I think the other problem is the bulk of the advice or experts they get to talk on these sort of situations and do all the recommendations. I was speaking to a Professor Ross Hommel a couple of months ago, and he was an architect of some of the youth justice system and that. And the talking to elites is a bit of an issue. And when the elites decide or formulate a outcome for the government or a recommendation come, and I'd just like to show a slide now. I'll just scroll it down. This is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and the people who are coming up with the interventions or the recommendations or the schemes and that all live in this top sort of area, self-actualization, where they already have the status. They don't have any problems with their wages or accommodation or anything like that, and they want to be seen as being, well versed and all those things. Yet the situation you're dealing with is down here in the bottom, and unless you've got a mindset to address people's safety and security and just their need to get shelter and those sort of things, if you're only using these people to provide the input, you're not going to get a result that's going to fix these things down the bottom. So unless there's more input from people in the street, people affected by crime, and that seems to be the last thing. I mean, there was a few visits by government bodies up to Cairns and other places in regards to supposedly talking to victims and looking at the youth justice system. But really, the victims of crime didn't get much of a chance to put their case across. And what they wanted. So that's another ongoing problem.
Yeah, they've completely lost touch with victims after the fact. one of the incidents that happened during our first foot patrol. We were in a street known for having multiple houses that housed car thieves. There was regularly tow trucks there to pick up stolen cars from the front yard. They're that brazen now. They just don't even park. They don't even dump them. They just park them in the driveway. They don't even care. And we were down there, and there was about 100 of us, probably 30 carloads, as well as extra people. And really, really quickly, there was about 20, 30 police on site. Now, one person yelled out to the senior sergeant there, and she did quite a good job handling this because it was a very hairy situation, well, it could have been, and said that, the week before he was at work at the coal mines, like many people here are, and his wife and kids were home alone, and they were robbed, and it took the police an hour to get there with only a woman and child inside, and the next day they didn't even pop past when they said they would. Now, she was visibly concerned and wanted to speak to him after about the incident. But then before she could even finish her sentence, another person in the crowd yelled out, told a similar story, then another person, then another person, then another person. And it went on and on and on. And it became very apparent that it's not just the court system. There's also massive issues there within the police, within resources, and within just willingness to act. So when you've got, 30 cops that are pretending not to smile and agree with us, we know that they do. And then you've got 100 people, each with the story of being forgotten about. This is creating a lot of anger too, because people are being forgot about, and they're being forgot about in massive numbers. For a long time, I've tried to defend the police and say, we've got the best police in the world. We don't have a quarter of the problems other countries do around the world. And I still somewhat believe that. But if you get into the nitty gritty of it and you speak to all these victims, you actually speak to the real victims, the people that are filling these streets with me. Their stories are horrific. They're scary. And I can see why they're also sort of fearful and starting to act out now, because they feel like they're on their own. And when you listen to their stories, you can see they are on their own.
I think the other concerning thing is, like in your situation with around that home, it didn't take long for 30 police to get mustered to look at that situation, but it
5
takes
minutes.
but whereas there's no resources to patrol the streets and look at, or even visit people who have had crimes committed until days after the event. So that's something that needs to be realigned, I think. And I also think the problem with the police is, I think, especially we're seeing in Victoria and maybe to a bit more and a little bit less in Queensland, they seem to be far too aligned with the government. They don't seem to be independent enough in regards to their actions. I mean, they're under the control of the minister, and we all know that. But it seems like in political situations like we had in COVID, they were also all willing to rush and sort of penalise or enact the requirements of the government on people trying to defend their own constitutional right of freedom of movement, things like that. They were, on hand all the time and heavy-handed to a degree, and yet for this wanton criminal action, they seem to be a little bit behind the 8 ball.
They're so far behind the 8 ball that there was a household full of known criminals, many of them very young, many of them with 20, 30 charges against them, that since that first foot patrol, they've actually been whipped off to police protection, nice new house full of food. Now, if you're a young criminal and all your victims come knocking and the first thing police do is protect you, give you a new house, do you reckon you're going to stop, pull your socks up, or do you reckon you'll just keep doing what you're doing?
Well, yeah, it's the same thing. We're facilitating it. Basically, the system is facilitating them to continue the lifestyle there. And here's a rub that gets me is, like, people keep saying, well, they're all victims from the hard childhood, but these kids know what they're doing, and they're willfully criminal, and they enjoy what they're doing. You can't tell me they don't enjoy getting out in those cars and revving it around and sticking it up to the police and the public. They don't have any empathy for anyone. It's just, well, we can do what we want, and that's it. And people keep making these excuses for them, but the fact is they know what they're doing and they enjoy doing it. because
it's
it
our
might
fault for
consequences.
allowing it to happen. It's our fault for allowing it to happen. So one of the big conversations we had with the police at this one house is, it was clear that they weren't allowed to answer or agree with us. So I just made the comment and I yelled it. I said, I know you guys agree with us, and I know you think that you can't say anything because you work for the government. But what we're all doing now, the public, the people in front of you, we're not allowed to be doing this, but we're doing it anyway because we're standing shoulder to shoulder to fix a problem. Why can't you do the same? Now, there's no reason why they can't do the same. There's thousands of police, and if they all grew some balls, for the lack of a better term, and stood up together like we used to decades ago when the unions actually had a bit of courage, then they might be able to help us too. Because at the moment, it's only the public that stand up, and they're only standing up in small portions. They're very motivated for a very small amount of time, and then we're straight back to the starting point of where we were again.
But another thing is the media. I mean, as soon as someone wants to do something, and I mean, we had the same situation. We had the, I can't remember their name, but it was something Knights or whatever. But they were looking at sort of doing patrols and things like that. And of course, straight away they got labelled as vigilantes and all this sort of thing. Yeah. So the media is putting the same story over. They talk about, they love the headlines of these horrific stories and that sells newspapers or stories. But when it comes for people sort of standing up to it, they quickly label them vigilantes, ringleaders, whatever else. They don't do anything to sort of, defend. Well, the public needs to take some action. The public needs to show a common front against this crime wave.
Not just a front, but a consistent front. See, many of these groups have popped up over the years, and it's all action, and then it vanishes because, there's some lifestyle factors. People are busy, people have families and jobs, and it's hard to maintain stuff. But at the end of the day, we are going to be the ones that have to fix this. So there's going to have to be people in the community standing up to create their own programs and get busy. The government have consistently lied to us consistently. I'll give you an example. In 2020, I debated our current MP, Barry O'Rourke, as well as a couple other candidates live on ABC Radio, ABC Capricornia. And you can, this is actually still on Facebook to look up during 2020. And a lot of the debate was around crime statistics. And one of the suggestions that MP Barry O'Rourke made was that we'd seen a 40% decrease in crime. Now, I was very up with the statistics on crime at that moment, and this is all live to see for yourself, as I said. In reality, we'd seen a 3,000% increase in the crimes people care about. Of course, I'm talking about crimes like car theft, aggravated assault, burglary, things like that. I'm not sure what crime he was talking about, 40% decrease, but I think it was something silly like the instances of people getting booked with driving without a seatbelt, or something no one really cares about when you've got car theft and robberies going on everywhere. So that was back in 2020. Since then, we've seen all sorts of promises, 5-point plans, 10-point plans, where the government's doing this and cracking down, the toughest youth justice laws in the country and all this sort of nonsense. But the reality is, from 2020 to 2023, back then I was saying we're going to end up like Townsville. Now we are like Townsville. And it's dishonest from politicians, and a lot of it's out of fear. They're not saying these things thinking they're being accurate. They're saying these things just to keep themselves in a job. And until we get some people with integrity in these these parliamentary jobs, nothing's ever going to change. And I very much doubt we're going to see many people with integrity in the parliament. So once again, that takes us back to the solution, which is the community standing up and doing it for themselves.
The other thing is although crime, law and justice is the responsibility of the states, we have had a situation where there's now Commonwealth interference in regards to their signing of agreements with third parties, with the UN and to the Closing the Gap Agreement that impacts on society. And not a lot of people realise that. And I think some of the problems in regards to why state governments seem to be inactive or fixing it is because they're not telling us of the constraints of these agreements that sit there. And I just want to show another slide. this is the UN's United Nations minimum standard rules of treatment for prisoners. Now you can see that the cover has Mr. Mandela on it, who was a political prisoner. Now, political prisoners is somewhat different to criminals or people who commit hardcore crimes and have victims. But Rule 59, prisoners shall be allocated to the extent possible to prisons close to their homes and places of social rehabilitation. Well, that seems all nice, but what it does is puts a benefit to the offenders again to house them close to, if they commit a crime in Brisbane, but they're in their family and that's in Townsville or whatever. It places an onus on the government to relocate them there if possible. And we
very
know
costly.
how we currently have the situation where the government is actually chartering planes on a regular basis for a lot of money to move prisoners from one area to another. I mean, really, do they have that much contempt for the public that they're prepared to spend, tens of millions of dollars in a year transporting prisoners from one to another?
Yeah, it's definitely an enormous waste. And another waste we're seeing in the ear, and this is a huge expense to the taxpayer, is because of the police pursuit laws. As you know, the police cannot pursue a lot of these stolen cars. They're not allowed to. Now, what does that mean? That particularly around Townsville, there's helicopters that are employed to come in and track these cars at $3,000 an hour. Now, some of these can go on for a full day at $3,000 an hour. There's, sometimes dozens of car thefts every day between, Bundaberg and Townsville, dozens every day. And now we've got these choppers flying around the sky costing us that much money because the police aren't allowed to chase them.
But the other thing, we've got the same situation in Cairns, but we use the rescue helicopter. It's got a designated name or number and that, but that's used. Now, all right, it's obviously the priority would, if something happened and it had to go to a rescue or something, it would have to be diverted. But the thing is, if it's been up half an hour, a couple of hours doing this, it has to go and refuel. So now there's a time lag to go and rescue people from the sea or falling down a waterfall or whatever. And the other thing is you're burning up its maintenance hour. It's lifetime. But they're very costly. Like you say, $3,000 to operate an hour. But the thing is, if you're winding its hours up fairly quickly, you're getting to a major scheduled servicing where it's going to be out of action for anything up to a week or 2 weeks in some cases, especially if there's a part that needs replacing that they didn't count on. So this is a ridiculous situation of costing that. But that's the thing the government's prepared to do, but it's not prepared to do the basics of bloody addressing proper detention or proper punishment.
Well, if they start going down the detention line, they're worried they're going to upset the left, and the left are very vocal. And this is what I meant earlier. It's time to start taking actions that based on results, not based on who you're going to upset. I don't care if you take 3 kids off their family because they're car thieves and they happen to be Indigenous and they want to scream stolen generation. Tough. They shouldn't have stolen all those cars, because you know what? Same thing happens to white kids, and there's plenty of white criminals out there doing exactly the same thing. It's just this excusing, this tippy-toeing around, walking on eggshells, waiting for the wrong person to get upset and cry or start virtue signaling. That's what we're saying. That's at the base, the heart of this problem is that we've just gone too soft and we're too scared of what everyone else is going to label you. I don't care what people label me. And within a month of this going on, the bad labels have actually stopped. I haven't heard all those silly things anymore, unless you read The Guardian or something ridiculous like that. I don't see it anymore. People have realised that I'm actually just speaking the truth, that I've actually got the same background. It's actually got nothing to do with race. That's just because I dug my heels in and said what needed to be said. If everyone had that attitude, we'd be in a lot different position, I believe.
Well, it still boils down, like that document from the UN, we're a signatory to that. So we've got all these encumbrances put on us in regards to we've got to do all this compliance to meet that requirement. But the other thing, the other thing in there is that compliance. You know, when people if people start to go through it, they can actually make it even harder for the government, because if you start reading in there, there's a lot of other things that we probably don't do at the moment, that if someone took it up and saying, well, you're not doing this in accordance with the UN, you have to provide better accommodation, you have to do this, it's just going to skyrocket out. But we do seem to be far too easy for our Commonwealth government to sign up to these things, but it all falls onto the states for delivery. And maybe we need to somehow, those UN treaties and that, we need the states to agree before the Commonwealth signs us up for those ridiculous things.
The UN should just stay out of it altogether. They've got they're doing nothing to cause us problems.
That's right. But unfortunately, our government Commonwealth government seem to be too eager to sign up to refugee programs, to everything else, climates and that, without reference to the general public. But moving on to what we're talking about with crime statistics in regards to, you get the general, most people will get from the newspapers and the news stories and nightly news. It's just, you know, one crime after another, and especially juvenile crime. So most people interpret it as the issue's getting worse, and you get stories from shopkeepers and that just had their windows broken, or the extent of the other big one is shoplifting. The extent that that's accelerated so much it's almost putting people out of business as well. So the perception would be by most people that it's getting worse and worse. But then you get politicians who either cherry pick some statistics and say, well, it's getting better. So how's the poor mug in the street going to sort of say, well, they're coming up with these facts. Well, then I must be wrong. And that's not the case. So how do we start getting to the situation where we can find out the decent, the proper statistics and that? Do you know of any sort of sites or that where people can get a good feel, or is it just something that's covered up by the government or controlled?
Well, the police website has all the statistics there. These are the QPS was where I got my figures from when I debated Barry O'Rourke. They were all there. They were live on the website, and the problem is no one actually looks. They just they just listen to what the politician says and takes it as it is. But if you just look at the stats through QPS, it's all there, and it's all terrifying. The difference between what we say and what the politicians say is, well, if a politician's car gets stolen, we have to buy them a new car. If my car gets stolen, I have to buy me a new car. So they've got a very comfortable reason not to worry about it, because they don't buy anything for themselves. We do. Perhaps we should take away some of their benefits of us paying for all their life. And when their stuff is robbed, they might feel it just like we do, because the stats are there and they're pretty accurate all through QPS.
I might get a link to that site and put it up. The other thing that colours stats too, but if there's a bit of pressure on police that we're not aware of, not to press charges or do nothing more than issue warning. So if for some reason there's a directive to sort of cut down, only charge those real serious offences and let the other ones off, that colours the perception, just as it is in the courts when there's no conviction recorded. That's another issue. But we also have a big problem ahead of us. I mean, it's probably happening now, but we're not aware of it. But I'll just put up this last screen. Right. National Closing the Gap Agreement. Target 11. Outcome: Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people are not overrepresented in the justice system. The target is by 2031 reduce the rate of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander young people in detention by at least 30%. Now, that's a great target and that's a great idea, but
if that means they're doing less crime.
You actually reduce the crime, how are you doing that? So, and I think what we're seeing now is this push to lower the age of culpability for criminal guilt. So they're talking, it's now 10, they're talking about 12, and maybe even, I think West Australia's even talking 14. So if you did that, you would achieve that target overnight.
Which is very concerning, isn't it?
Yeah, but you don't get the respite from the actual activities. There's no difference to the victims. It's just a matter of the way they're not accountable for it.
Well,
so
there will be a difference to the victims. It'll be much, much worse.
Well, yeah, that's to be expected in the long run. But that's the problem with these sort of goals. Unless they've got a mean to actually reduce the crime rate, that's not going to help us whatsoever. And
we need to fix the cause, not the problem. The cause of the issue is what we need to focus on. The rest of it is kind of irrelevant. Don't worry about keeping numbers down in jail if it just means you're letting them out earlier. Through 2020, I can't remember what month it was. On the Morning Bulletin here, front page, 16-year-old with over 100 charges. Over 100 charges. A 16-year-old record was wiped by the judge because the judge believed he'd have a better chance at rehabilitation and starting his life without all that on his record. Now, can you imagine what that 16-year-old's friends are thinking? Maybe they've got 80 charges. Well, if we just get another 20, they'll let us off too. And you know what? Funnily enough, from 2020 to 2023 is when we've seen the biggest spike in all those exact serious crimes: the car theft, the aggravated burglary, and assault.
It's definitely they're that's the thing. These kids are streetwise and they are smart. They learn everything.
They're smart.
They learn everything from their peers, or maybe even amongst them there's those sort of Uncle Fagans and whatever that sort of teach them all in the first place. But that really is an issue with it. No consequence at any point in time, and the fact that when you hit that 18, you've got a clean slate. I mean, but the trouble is, most of them by then are so ingrained into what they're doing, they're probably not going to keep their nose clean anyway. They're just going to go on.
That's right.
So
it's generational. Yeah.
In regards to the meeting, Malcolm Roberts was there. Is there any sort of feedback from One Nation in regards to a bit more on their sort of policies and that in the future? Because we're coming up to the state election next year.
Yeah, look, this is nothing new for One Nation. Throughout 2020, there's a great law and order policy, and there still is a great law and order policy. It's something they've been passionate about for a long time, and it's very hard to argue with their policy. That they've covered everything there. They've got prevention, rehabilitation, and detention. The difference between them and other parties is they've actually just got the courage to say what needs to be done. So are they serious about it? Yes. Well, they were the only people at the event. I know the media tried to paint it as if it was a One Nation event and they were recruiting some vigilante mob leader or something. I think that was one of the headlines I saw somewhere. But in reality, they were the ones that attended. Matt Canavan, the LNP federal senator, he did respond to me and he apologised that he couldn't make it. He did want to be there, but he just had prior commitments. It was fairly late notice. Labor had no interest in showing up whatsoever. So again, it just comes down to who showed up when you needed it. Well, One Nation did. And again, our dear MP, Barry O'Rourke, he was probably down at the pub. I believe he spends most of his after hours at the Red Lion down there. So perhaps we get him out of the pub and add him into the crime forums and start working together. We might get somewhere, because since he's been in office, crime has gone up, non-stop. And particularly between 2020 and 2023 is when we've seen some of the biggest spikes.
I think the other thing that's concerning is neither the major parties are too willing to put their policies up on websites anymore. I think it's just hidden in a book, and they come out and spiel a few lines. There's nothing on their website say, well, this is what we're going to do about crime. So, you can get a bit of a feel what they're going to do or intended to do, and then hold them to account to that after the event. And I think this is a big flaw in our political system, that political parties aren't putting their policies up for people to view long before they have a chance to vote for them, and also look at the consequences of what happened in each policy area.
We really need a decent integrity commission where this needs to become legislation, where policy and parties that put in policy need to be held to account by law, because there's no integrity in Parliament. They're all lies and fibs. I'm sure you've heard a million promises. Oh, look, we've all heard the same promises every election time. Doesn't matter what town you're from. It's those same promises you hear every election time. They base it off figures that show they get the votes. They use fair and they talk about crime. But once they've won the job, they don't talk about it again for 3 years. This has happened systematically here in Rockhampton that I've witnessed with my own eyes, going back to 2017. I had a close look at the state campaign there. And from 2017 to 2020, we heard the same pack of lies, whether it be around crime or building a stadium in town or any other issues we've had. They were all promised, none of them happened. 2020, exact same promises. New stadium in town, better crime results. And once again, election's over, nothing happens. Now, I can guarantee you it won't be long before Barry crawls out from under his rock and the Labor machine start talking about all the great things they're going to do for Rockhampton. And once that election's over, it'll disappear again.
But there again, really, it's the voting public. The voting public have to start accepting responsibility. They facilitate these outcomes. So unless they either start being more objective in their thinking, or at least put pressure on their local members, or we're not going to get anywhere. The politicians are just going to keep treating us like doormats if they figure there's no consequences for their inaction, sort of thing. And we just go along with it. It's like what we need to do is have somewhere along the line is just have a general policy for voters. Just vote everyone who's in out.
Yeah.
And then just try a whole new lot and see what happens, and keep doing it until we get the outcome we desire. But their political machine has worked out the public to the nth degree. They've got all sorts of marketing people. They've got all sorts of advisors and consultants, statisticians, and they just got us. They just got our number. Our number one is one for dumb. And that's it, the dumb public, and we can get away with what we like.
Oh, it is. I remember around COVID lockdown times, it was uncovered that I think Palaszczuk spent $500,000 on polling around voter sentiment around lockdowns, and then changed their mind before the election. So you tell me they haven't got a great marketing machine figuring out what they're going to vote for.
Well, here's the thing. Maybe if we got rid of all their consultants and advisors of that and threw them all out and took all that
did the job yourself
and took all the money that's been spent on them and put them into the juvenile justice system, as in the detention centres and that, we'd be right.
I'll be laughing. Yeah, be peace at once.
Okay, then look, we've done the hour. If you just sort of wind up now and give us a bit of an outlook of what your plans are the future, One Nation's lead into this in the next year or so, especially towards the state election. Yeah,
there is the state elections coming up next year. There will be an eye on that for sure. For now, I'm going to be focused on the morbid prevention side. Like I said before, we've had great meetings with some real leaders in the youth work community here, and we've had many chats about what we're going to do to kick some programs off. I can do just through my sport. We've got lots of really good options that have been really successful before. A couple other things on the side as well that we're still working out in the coming week. But I'd like to start working with a lot of these youths much before then. Much like the 2020 campaign, I made some promises there, and I said I'd do it whether I won or not. I didn't win, and I still did all those things I promised. We had a massive bullying issue here that we brought in a fantastic mentorship anti-bullying program, fully funded for one of the worst schools here. I did that even though I'd lost. One of the other issues we had here is there's no sporting codes. The sporting codes here have just been left to rot. We don't have anything come to town very rarely. We basically have the Rocky Nats, that's it. So even through my gym now, I'm now hosting tournaments where are going to be the gateway to the Olympics in 2032, as well as national titles. So we've got that in Central Queensland now. So another thing that I said I'd do, whether I win or not, and we've done that now. And now we're moving on to crime. So regardless of if I run or if I win or not, this is just another job that needs to be done that I'll be doing. So we're going to focus on that wholeheartedly now and see what sort of difference we can make. And then come election time, we'll have a little look and see what other issues we can, bring up and take action on without the fake promises of not worrying about it if you don't win, because that's not how we do things.
I think one of the biggest other issues in regional areas too is with sporting bodies, they're starting to flounder now because volunteers are hard to get, costs are high because of uniforms and things like that. Maybe the governments and parties, maybe they should be focusing on support of sports associations and that, making sure, even subsidising uniforms and fees and that. So those people who are doing the right thing are getting a benefit, which is, I think, is more important than some of the actions to resolve for the people who are offenders. And the other thing is, if those sports are strong and the fees and the uniforms are more reasonable cost, there's also a good chance that people in those economic situations where they're deterred because of costing to join a sports, that, because a lot of them are expensive and that, netball. I mean, I have 3 daughters and they play netball, basketball, and all those things. It all added up. Maybe the focus of One Nation or some political party should be, we're going to make regional sports associations stronger and improve the life of volunteer organisations so they can do the job that people of all sorts can make the best use of those facilities there.
Well, it's something we spoke about in 2020 heavily, and it's something that those exact points you just brought up, you hit the nail on the head there. It's something, once again, the government should do something, and if they do, that's great. But at this point, I've just done that myself too. I mean, exactly all those points. I mean, I sort out business sponsorship throughout locally here, and so the tournaments I'm putting on here, they're free. There's no entry fees. Uniforms within my gym are subsidised for all juniors because of the sponsorship we got through local businesses. The training fees are so affordable. I can't even explain how affordable they are. They get subsidised uniforms. The events themselves are free, and that's all just off my own organisation, finding the right sponsors that care about the region, want to bring people to town, that want young people to get into sport, that care about the costs for families, especially if people have multiple children. And so that's already a reality within my gym and my sport in this town. It's just only within sort of my community here because I'm the one that's done the work. Now other people can do the work. It's a little bit harder for sure, but they shouldn't really need to, because in these regional areas, especially in a place like Rockhampton, we're central. We should have the best facilities for every code here, because we should be by rights hosting all sorts of state titles in every code because we are right in the middle. But we're not, and we're not because we don't have the facilities. So it's a bit different of my sport. I was able to pull together everything, and we do that every 3 months now. But everyone else is suffering, and until the government steps up and stops making all these empty promises, because that was another empty promise we heard in 2017, 2020. You add that to the list of empty promises, and again, nothing's happened. So you're dead right. But if you're one of those codes that are suffering, it's probably time to stop waiting on the government to help, because they probably won't, and put together some sponsorship packages and get out there and do the work.
Okay, then, no worries. Thanks very much for that. It's really appreciated your time. And if you just hold on the line for a second, I'll just introduce next week's show and have a quick talk to you.
No worries. Thanks, Bill.
Thanks, Torin. If you enjoyed today's show, please like, share, and subscribe to our Facebook page, and also subscribe to our YouTube channel. next week we'll be having a rundown on the budget and the aftermath for Central and North Queensland and regional Queensland. Join me with my guest, Dr. Marcus Smith. Thank you.